What's going on, everybody? Khalipas Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Visible Midnight. Now, this is a pretty inexpensive phone from Visible, but despite being one of the lower end phones offered by the carrier, it does have some pretty nice qualities. So in this video, we're going to be taking a look at it and going over what kind of value it actually provides. Now, before we go any further, I do want to remind you to go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot. And for your convenience, I have included the link to this phone in the video description, so be sure to check out that link for the latest info on pricing and availability, because this is always changing. But with that being said, let's get started. So this phone has a 6.52-inch LCD display with a resolution of 720p, a PPI of 269, and an aspect ratio of 20:9. So we're getting a pretty tall and narrow form factor here, which is going to be great for content consumption. If you're reading, it's going to fit more stuff on the screen so you won't have to scroll as much. And if you're watching a video or something like that, especially in landscape mode, it's going to have a nice cinematic looking aspect ratio. And of course, in addition to this, the phone is definitely on the larger side. Now, it's not the biggest phone out there you can get, but at 6.52 inches, I would say this display is still decently large. Now, as far as the actual image itself goes, it does look decently sharp for what it is, really only being a 720p display, and the colors look pretty nice as well. Now, the screen is decently bright, but I will say the viewing angles really aren't the best. Really, unless you're looking at the phone straight on, you're really not going to be able to see it very well, so that's definitely something to keep in mind. I have seen much better, even in this price range. But overall, for just general use, provided you're in a normal kind of setting, the display is decently good. Now, we got a water drop notch up here for the front-facing camera, and this camera is 8 megapixels, so not bad. Overall, as far as the general look of the phone goes, the bezels are a little on the thicker side, and this isn't the thinnest phone out there, but overall, I wouldn't say it's bad. It is a pretty standard looking entry-level phone. I feel like I've seen plenty of phones that look almost exactly like this, so it's nothing special, but at the same time, it's nothing exceptionally bad either. Now, for storage, this phone is getting 32 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion. So while this is pretty common for an entry-level phone like this, I would say that 32 gigabytes is really not that much. So if you're maybe new to smartphones and you don't quite know yet how much storage things really take up, just keep in mind that 32 gigabytes of internal storage in this day and age is really not a whole lot. To give you an idea of what this really looks like, right now, as you can see here, I'm using 14.64 gigabytes right now, and that's 46% of the entire storage available. And as you can see right here, really all I have on here is the system, which you can't not have, and then a few different apps, and this is really pretty much all I have. I will say this is barely anything as far as apps go, and again, it's taking up 46% of my entire storage, so you can probably imagine, as you're accumulating apps, photos and videos, data from text, stuff like that, it's really gonna add up fast, even if you're just an average user. Now, if you do hardly anything on your phone and only have a couple different apps, then you might be able to get away with it just fine. But if you're used to more moderate activity, I would definitely suggest at least getting a microSD card so you can offload some photos and videos and stuff like that to save some space. Now, if you're a power user, I would definitely recommend looking into a different device that has more storage, because even with a microSD card, nothing really beats having more internal storage on the phone. And there are plenty of entry-level phones that have 64 gigabytes. So if you are one of those people who has a lot of different apps and photos and videos and stuff like that, you might want to consider this. Now, one cool feature this phone has that's kind of unique for a phone in this price range is wireless charging. This phone actually does support 10-watt wireless charging, so that's a real nice feature to have for a couple different reasons. The first reason is simply the convenience factor, because sometimes it's nice to just put your phone on a wireless charger instead of having to plug it in. The other cool thing about wireless charging is if something happens to your charging port, if it breaks or something like that, if you don't have wireless charging, you basically just have to throw out the phone and get a new one. But with this phone, since we have wireless charging, if the charging port breaks and you have a wireless charger, you're probably going to be able to use it for a little bit longer, since with wireless charging, you don't absolutely need the charging port to keep the phone alive. Now, of course, wireless charging is not a game changer by any means, but since this phone does have it, it's definitely a nice feature, especially once you get used to it. Now, for security, this phone has both a fingerprint scanner and face unlock, and the fingerprint scanner is located right here on the power key. I always thought this was a nice spot for it, because since you're going to be touching the power key to wake up your display anyway, it's nice to have it unlock at the same time. And then of course, having face unlock doesn't hurt either, because when you have both options, if you're in a situation where one is more convenient, of course, you'll be able to use that one. Or if you prefer one over the other, you won't have to worry because this phone has both. So let's give this fingerprint scanner a try and see how well it works. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, this fingerprint scanner is real fast and responsive. In fact, I would say it's actually quite a bit faster than a lot of phones that are more expensive than it. So that's a nice thing to see. Now taking a look at the rear camera setup here, we got a 13 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera for portrait mode. So this is a pretty decent setup. It's not really anything extravagant, but I'm glad that this phone has an ultra wide camera because there are lots of other phones in this price range that don't. Now it doesn't have a macro camera, but I personally do think this is outweighed by the fact that it has an ultra wide camera, because an ultra wide camera honestly has so many more uses than a macro camera. A macro camera is more of a niche type of feature that not everyone's going to benefit from, but with an ultra wide camera, most people are going to be in a situation where it would come in handy one way or another. So to give you an idea of what this phone's camera can do, here are some photos taken with the camera. For what it is, this phone's camera really isn't half bad. It's actually pretty impressive how it captures the colors and details, and the pictures are a lot brighter than I expected. Now these are a couple photos taken with the ultra wide camera. Now in terms of ultra wide cameras, these aren't really the best I've seen. If you're using the phone to take photos for social media or something like that you really want to keep, then I would say you could probably do better, because there is quite a bit of distortion here. They definitely don't look the greatest. But if you just want to take a few photos here and there just for the sake of using the ultra wide camera, then it should be okay. But as far as the regular camera goes, I do think the photos taken with the regular camera, considering that this is just a $100 entry-level phone, are actually pretty impressive. Now this is a photo taken with portrait mode. I will say, with portrait mode on this phone, it is a little bit tougher to focus on things than it may be with other phones, but if you're patient enough, it does get the job done. Now my only complaint about this photo in particular is that it's a little dim, and that does seem to be a common thing that you find in lower end phones, so it's not really that big a deal. But just keep in mind, if you want to get nice photos for social media or something like that you want to keep, this phone does have that capability. You just will have to probably be a little patient with it and really just take the time to get the right shots and angles. Now for video, this phone can shoot in a max quality of 1080p in both the rear and the front cameras. So that's pretty standard, nothing out of the ordinary there. I probably wouldn't use this phone to shoot videos that you want to keep, especially if there's audio in them, because the microphone of this phone is really not going to be very good for anything besides talking. But if you're just making videos for Snapchat or something, where the quality isn't too important, then it should be fine. Now internally, this phone is getting 3 gigabytes of RAM with the MediaTek Helio P22 processor. Now I ran a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone, and it came back with a single core score of 147 and a multi-core score of 820. Now in and of itself, a Geekbench 5 benchmark test score doesn't really mean a whole lot. You really need something to compare it to, so what I would do is run a Geekbench 5 benchmark test on your current device and compare it to this to see if this phone will be an upgrade. Now in my experience using this phone, I haven't really had too many performance issues. For the most part, it has run pretty smoothly, but I have had several apps crash on this phone that I didn't really expect to crash. There were really simple things like Instagram, Facebook, even Geekbench 5 itself. When I first tried to run the benchmark test, it actually crashed in the middle of it, and that rarely happens on Geekbench 5. This is one of the few phones where it actually had trouble running the benchmark test. Now that doesn't mean that it's going to crash every time you try to open an app, because for the most part it has been fine, but it's still something to keep in mind, because if you're going to be on your phone a lot, you're probably going to experience this once or twice with at least a couple different apps. So if you're going to be in that situation where you're constantly on your phone, you might want to consider getting a different device with a better processor, because while this phone is fine for more regular use, if you're constantly on it, you're bound to notice it struggling more frequently. Now for the battery, this phone's battery is pretty decent. It's not amazing, but it's not half bad either. So we got a 4000 milliamp hour battery that supports 10 watt fast charging. Again, it's not the biggest battery out there, but it's not small either. So you're gonna get a decent amount of battery life throughout the day. And even if you use your phone pretty heavily and drain it a lot, the 10 watt fast charging is definitely gonna help, because of course with fast charging, you can charge your phone a lot faster. Now in terms of longevity, longevity, this phone is going to be pretty decent. With the 4000 milliamp hour battery, as the battery degrades, you're probably not going to notice it nearly as quickly as you would with, say, an iPhone battery that's typically a lot smaller. But at the same time, you're not going to get the same longevity as you would with a 5000 milliamp hour battery, of course. So will the battery's longevity really be a problem with this phone? Definitely not. But if it is your priority, if you want a phone that's going to have the best type of battery longevity, one you can get and keep it for years without having to replace it, then you could still do better. Now, unsurprisingly, this phone doesn't have NFC. Despite more and more budget phones getting it, you still don't typically see NFC in phones in this price range. But maybe sometime in the future, phones like this might start getting it. But as of right now, if you are looking for a phone that does have NFC, this is not going to be it. Now, in case you don't know what it is, NFC is the main technology behind contactless mobile payment services like Google Pay. So if you were hoping to use it on this phone, unfortunately, you won't be able to. So now that we've gone over some of the specs of the phone, let's take a closer look at the device itself. So on the left side here, not a whole lot going on, just the slot for the SIM card and the microSD card. On the bottom here, we got the microphone, a USB-C port, and the speaker. On the right, we got our power key that also doubles as our fingerprint scanner, volume down, volume up. On the top here, we got a 3.5mm headphone jack and the noise canceling microphone. On the back here, we got a camera setup, the flash, and the visible logo right here. The back is made of a matte material that doesn't really pick up fingerprints a whole lot, but you can still see them a little in certain lighting. Overall, the phone does have a decent design. It doesn't really look too unique or stylish or anything like that, but it gets the job done. It's not the thinnest, but it's definitely not too thick either, so it's still going to be comfortable to hold in your hand and carry in your pocket. And one thing that actually surprised me about this phone, being that it's really only a $100 entry-level smartphone, is that it does have some decent weight to it. It doesn't feel cheap at all, so if you're looking for a more inexpensive phone, but still want it to feel like it's good quality, then this phone is a good option for that. But overall, my general thoughts about the Visible Midnight. I think for what it is, this is a pretty good entry-level phone. One thing that was a little disappointing to me is just the processor. Not necessarily the processing power itself, but the fact that it was a little buggy when I was trying to use certain apps. That was a little disappointing. But despite that, the performance was decent. So if you're going to be using your phone a decent amount for more basic activities, like sending text messages, making calls, browsing the web, and some light social media use, then this phone is going to be fine. But if you're going to be on your phone all the time, you're definitely going to start to notice a few little bugs in it, and it's definitely going to struggle a bit with higher end activities. So if you're more of a power user, I would definitely suggest looking at a different device with a better processor. As far as the storage goes, that's another area where I was a little disappointed, just because 32 gigabytes really isn't a whole lot of space. But again, you do have microSD card expansion with this phone, so that is an option, and it's really just an entry-level phone, so you can only really expect so much. But I do like the quality of the phone itself. Again, it does have some nice weight to it, and the materials do feel pretty premium for what it is. It has a decently nice camera, a pretty good display despite the pretty bad viewing angles. It's got a fairly large battery and wireless charging on top of that. So if you're looking for an entry-level phone to do basic activities with and maybe take a few nice photos here and there, then the Visible Midnight is definitely a viable option. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope you found this information useful as well. If you did, don't forget to leave a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And once again, I will be including the link to this phone in the video description, so be sure to check that out for the latest info on pricing and availability, because that will be changing from time to time. But that's it for this video. As always, I will see you in the next one.